The volcanic winds swept across the nesting grounds as dozens of dragon eggs began to crack and split. Steam rose from the heated rocks where proud mothers watched their offspring struggle free from their shells. Strong hatchlings burst through in moments, roaring their arrival to the world with tiny but fierce voices. Bronze scales gleamed in the red light. Crimson wings spread wide despite their newness. These were proper dragons, and their mothers rumbled approval. One egg near the edge took longer than the rest. The shell was paler than it should be, and the movements inside seemed weak. When a hatchling finally broke through, silence fell across the nearest dragons. The baby that emerged was small, barely half the size of her siblings. Her scales were silver white instead of the strong colors that marked dragon warriors. Her wings looked thin as paper, and her claws were soft as fresh clay. The mother dragon leaned down to examine her daughter. Disappointment crossed her massive face. She nudged the hatchling with her snout, testing for strength. The baby tumbled over easily, too weak to resist. Other adult dragons gathered around, their voices low and judging. "She will not survive her first week," one elder said, shaking his great head. "A waste of a good egg," another commented. "The shell should have been given to a stronger soul." The mother dragon looked at her weak daughter for a long moment. Dragon culture valued strength above all else. A warrior who could not fight had no place in the clan. A hatchling who could not prove her power deserved no resources. It was not cruelty, but truth, the way things had always been. She made her decision. The mother picked up the silver hatchling gently in her jaws and carried her away from the nesting grounds. She walked past the warm rocks, past the feeding areas, past the sheltered caves. At the very edge of dragon territory, where the volcanic stone met softer ground, she set the baby down. "If you are strong, you'll find your way back," the mother said. "If you are not, then this is mercy." She turned and walked away. The tiny hatchling chirped weakly, calling for warmth and food and comfort. No answer came. The night grew cold, and the baby dragon shivered alone. Far from the nesting grounds, in the temperate zone of the planet Drakkar, humans had built a small settlement. They had come here 3 years ago under treaty with the dragons. The humans would help develop farming methods for the harsh soil. In exchange, they received land and protection. It was a practical arrangement. Dragons rarely thought about the soft-skinned creatures who lived on the far side of their world. Ruth Whitmore knelt in the community garden, her knees protesting the position, but her hands steady as she worked the soil. At 70 years old, she had more energy than people half her age, though she would never admit how much her back ached at the end of each day. She wore practical clothes, sturdy boots, and a wide hat that shaded her face from the sun. "You should rest, Mom," her daughter, and called from the garden gate. "You have been out here for 4 hours. Plants do not grow faster because I sit down," Ruth replied, not looking up from her work. "Besides, I need samples from near the border. The soil there has different minerals." And sighed. "Just be careful. The nesting grounds are active right now." Ruth waved her daughter away and continued working. She had learned long ago that staying busy kept her mind healthy. After her husband died 5 years ago, she had thrown herself into volunteering, gardening, and helping wherever she was needed. The settlement on Drakkar had given her a new purpose when Earth felt too full of memories. She walked toward the border area, carrying her collection bag and small shovel. The treaty allowed humans access to unclaimed land, though they were warned to avoid dragon territories. Ruth had always been careful to respect the boundaries. She had seen dragons flying overhead, massive and terrifying, and had no desire to anger them. The chirping sound was so faint she almost missed it. Ruth stopped walking and tilted her head, listening. There was again a weak crying noise coming from behind a cluster of rocks. She knew that sound. She had raised 6 children, countless chickens, 3 dogs, 2 cats, and more orphan animals than she could count. That was the sound of something small and helpless and cold. Ruth climbed over the rocks, moving carefully on the uneven ground. Behind the largest stone, she found the source of the noise. A dragon hatchling, no bigger than a house cat, lay curled in a ball. Its silver scales caught the light, beautiful but wrong for a dragon. The baby was shivering, and its eyes were barely open. "Oh, you poor thing," Ruth whispered. She knew immediately what had happened. Dragons abandoned weak hatchlings. Everyone in the settlement knew this fact. It was dragon culture, dragon law, dragon tradition. Humans were not supposed to interfere. The hatchling chirped again, and Ruth saw its tiny chest struggling to breathe. The baby was dying. In a few hours, maybe less, it would be dead. The dragons would not care. This was nature taking its course. Ruth stood there having an argument with herself. The smart choice was to walk away. The safe choice was to respect dragon customs. Then the hatchling opened its eyes and looked directly at her. "Well, damn," Ruth said quietly. She took off her jacket and wrapped it around the dragon hatchling. The baby was cold as ice and light as air. Ruth tucked the little creature against her chest and started walking back toward the settlement. She had made many questionable decisions in her 70 years. This was probably the worst one yet. Ruth's small prefab home sat on the edge of the settlement, which suited her just fine. She preferred quiet to crowds. The house had one main room with a kitchen area, a bedroom barely big enough for her bed, and a bathroom that worked most of the time. It was not much, but it was hers. She laid the dragon hatchling on her kitchen table and turned the heating unit up as high as it would go. The baby was dangerously cold. Ruth had learned from years of rescuing animals that warmth came first, then food, then everything else. She grabbed every blanket she owned and created a nest in a large plastic storage bin. She placed heating pads underneath and tucked the blankets around them. The hatchling barely moved when Ruth placed her in the makeshift nest. That was a bad sign. Ruth touched the baby's chest gently, feeling for a heartbeat. It was there, faint but steady. Dragons were reptiles she remembered from the settlement orientation materials. Reptiles needed external heat to survive. "Come on, little one," Ruth whispered. "Stay with me." She filled the bowl with warm water and used a clean cloth to drip moisture onto the hatchling's mouth. The baby's tongue flickered weakly, taking in the water. Good. That was something. Ruth kept dripping water carefully, one drop at a time, until the hatchling seemed to revive slightly. What did dragon babies eat? Ruth pulled out her tablet and searched the settlement database. The information was limited. Dragons were private about their young. She found one document that mentioned hatchlings ate meat, ground fine, mixed with mineral supplements. Ruth had no dragon-specific supplements, but she had protein powder from Earth and some dried meat for stews. She mixed the protein powder with water and a tiny amount of ground meat, creating a thin paste. Using a medicine dropper, she carefully put a small amount near the hatchling's mouth. The baby sniffed, then her small tongue came out and licked at the mixture. Another lick, then another. "That's it," Ruth encouraged. "Eat. Get strong." The hatchling managed several small portions before falling asleep. Ruth covered her gently and sat down in her chair, suddenly exhausted. What had she done? She was harboring a dragon, an abandoned one, which probably violated a dozen rules. The settlement administrator would be furious and would panic. The dragons themselves might demand a return of their hatchling, weak or not. The knock on her door came an hour later. Ruth opened it to find David Okonkwo, the settlement administrator, standing on her doorstep. David was a good man, fair and practical, but he looked worried. "Ruth, I heard something concerning from Anne," he said carefully. "Come in," Ruth replied. There was no point in lying. David stepped inside and stopped when he saw the storage bin with its sleeping occupant. He stared at the silver hatchling. "Ruth, this could destroy the treaty. Dragons do not accept interference with their customs. Their custom is to let babies die," Ruth said flatly. "This affects everyone in the settlement, not just you." David rubbed his face tiredly. "If the dragons find out, they could demand we leave Drakkar." The baby was abandoned at the border. Dragon law does not cover abandoned hatchlings outside their territory. "I checked." David looked surprised. "You checked. I am old, not stupid. This hatchling was left to die in unclaimed land." David sighed. He looked at the sleeping hatchling again, and his expression softened slightly. "What will you do if she survives? Dragons grow large. You cannot keep her in a storage bin forever. I will handle that when the time comes. For now, she needs care. I can provide that. The other settlers will not be comfortable with a dragon living here, even a small one. Then they do not have to visit my house, Ruth said firmly. David studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I cannot officially approve this, but I also cannot order you to return a dying animal to the wilderness. Keep her hidden as much as possible. Do not let this become a public issue. And Ruth, if the dragons come asking questions, you are on your own. Understood. After David left and arrived, she stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Mom, everyone is talking about this. I have raised 6 children and countless animals. One more will not hurt. A dragon is not a puppy. No, she's a living creature who deserves a chance. Ruth looked down at the sleeping hatchling. I'm calling her Pearl, and came closer despite herself. Pearl was sleeping peacefully now, her tiny chest rising and falling steadily. In sleep, she looked vulnerable and innocent. She's kind of pretty, and admitted. But what happens when she gets bigger? I taught you to walk, talk, drive, and handle a dozen other impossible things. I think I can manage one dragon. You are impossible, and said, but she smiled slightly. Over the next week, Pearl grew stronger. She could lift her head steadily. She ate the protein mixture with more energy. Her scales, which had been dull and lifeless, began to shine. Ruth talked to her constantly, explaining everything she did. Pearl watched Ruth with intelligent eyes, chirping in response. The hatchling began following Ruth around the house with awkward, stumbling steps. When Ruth sat down, Pearl curled up against her feet. When Ruth cooked, Pearl watched from the floor. The dragon was imprinting on her, Ruth realized. She was becoming Pearl's family point one evening. Pearl made a new sound. It was not a chirp or a cry. It was a soft, rumbling, almost like a purr. Ruth reached down and stroked the hatchling's head gently. Pearl leaned into the touch, and the rumbling grew louder. You're going to be fine, Ruth told her. We both are. 3 months passed, and Pearl grew quickly. The dragon was now the size of a large dog, her silver scales hardened and gleaming. She could eat solid meat, and her claws had become sharp. Her wings had developed proper structure, folding neatly against her back. The problem was that Pearl showed no interest in using those wings. Ruth stood in an empty field, watching Pearl sniff at flowers. Come on, Pearl, Ruth called. Try spreading your wings. Pearl looked at her and chirped happily, but made no move to open her wings. We need a new approach, Ruth muttered. She had raised children through every challenge imaginable. Surely she could figure out one dragon. The key was motivation. Children learned when they had a reason to learn. What would motivate Pearl? Ruth pulled a piece of dried meat from her pocket and held it up. Pearl immediately perked up, watching the treat with interest. Ruth threw the meat a short distance. Pearl ran after on all fours, grabbed it in her jaws, and returned to Ruth's feet. Not helpful. What if I throw it higher? Ruth found a long stick and tied the meat to the end. She held it up as high as she could reach. Pearl sat down and stared at it, then looked at Ruth as if to say this was an unfair game. But after a moment, Pearl stood on her back legs, stretching upward. Her wings spread slightly for balance. Yes, Ruth encouraged. Use those wings. Pearl jumped, her wings flapping once instinctively. She did not catch the meat, but she had flapped. Progress. Ruth spent the next hour playing the same game, each time holding the stick a bit higher. Pearl's jumps became stronger, her wing flaps more deliberate. By the end of the session, Pearl was gliding for a second or two before landing at a human engineer named Robert offered to help. I worked on aircraft back on Earth, he explained. Robert brought diagrams and explained to Ruth how Pearl's wings worked. Ruth tried to explain it to Pearl using movements and demonstrations. They created an obstacle course in the field. Small jumps that required Pearl to spread her wings, platforms at different heights, and a small ramp. Pearl approached each challenge like a puzzle, figuring out the minimum effort needed. She was smart, perhaps too smart. She did not push herself. Then a little girl from the settlement named Lucy got lost in the caves near the border. The whole settlement searched frantically. Ruth went to help, Pearl following close behind. "A child is missing," David explained. She went exploring in the tunnel caves. Pearl's head lifted suddenly, her nostrils flaring. She made a low sound Ruth had never heard before, then started moving toward the caves. "Pearl, wait," Ruth called, but the dragon did not stop. The caves were dark and confusing, with multiple branches and dead ends. Pearl moved with confidence, following something Ruth could not detect. They went deeper, and Ruth heard faint crying. Pearl turned a corner, and there was Lucy sitting against a wall with a twisted ankle. "Lucy," Ruth called. The girl looked up, saw Pearl, and screamed. "It is okay. She will not hurt you." Pearl approached the frightened child slowly. She lay down and made soft rumbling sounds. Lucy stopped screaming and stared at the dragon. Pearl nudged the girl gently, then looked at Ruth. The message was clear. The child was hurt and scared. Ruth wrapped Lucy's ankle and let her lean on Pearl as they walked back to the cave entrance. Pearl moved carefully, adjusting her pace to the child's limp. When they emerged into daylight, Lucy's parents rushed forward. They stopped when they saw their daughter riding on a dragon's back. She found Lucy when no one else could. Ruth said simply. The settlement's attitude toward Pearl shifted after that day. She was no longer just Ruth's strange pet. She was the dragon who saved Lucy. Children began visiting to see Pearl, though Ruth carefully supervised all interactions. Pearl was gentle with the young humans, seeming to understand their fragility. But Ruth knew this peaceful time would not last. One afternoon, a dragon landed in the settlement's main square. He was young, with deep blue scales. Humans scattered in fear, but the dragon made no aggressive moves. "I am Bram," the dragon announced. "I have been sent to investigate reports of humans interfering with dragon customs." David came forward nervously. "We respect all dragon customs. Yet you harbor a dragon hatchling that was properly abandoned." Bram's eyes scanned the area. "Where is she?" Pearl emerged from behind Ruth's house. She approached Bram cautiously, making small chirping sounds. Bram stared at her in shock. "This is impossible. She should have died. She was dying when I found her," Ruth said. "I gave her food, warmth, and care. She was abandoned outside dragon territory." Bram circled Pearl slowly. "She is weak. Her scales are the wrong color." He paused. "Yet she lives." "How?" "She is not weak," Ruth said firmly. "She is different." Bram looked at Ruth. "You are very small and very old, human. Yet you speak to me without fear. Pearl's my family now. If you have a problem with that, you will have to deal with me first." Bram made a sound that might have been laughter. "The dragon elders will want to see this miracle hatchling. In 3 months, when Pearl reaches her first molt, she must appear before the council. They will test her worthiness to live. And if she fails your tests, then she dies, and you will have wasted your time saving her." Bram spread his wings. 3 months, human. Teach her what you can." He launched into the air and flew away. The 3 months before Pearl's trial passed quickly. Ruth worked with Pearl every day. Dragon trials focused on strength, combat ability, and fire breathing. Pearl had none of these in the way dragons expected. What Pearl did have was intelligence. She learned to solve complex problems. She could open any lock, figure out mechanical puzzles, and understand human speech. Her hearing was extraordinary, detecting ships before settlement sensors. Ruth decided that if Pearl could not win through traditional strengths, they would demonstrate different strengths. "I need to show the Dragon Council that Pearl has value," she told David. The day of the trial arrived. Pearl had molted the night before, her scales now harder and opalescent. She was the size of a small horse, beautiful in her strange silver coloring. She pressed close to Ruth. "You'll be fine," Ruth whispered. "Just be yourself." Bram arrived to escort them. "You have done well with her, but I do not think it will matter. The elders are traditional." The journey to the council grounds took an hour by dragon transport. When they arrived, Ruth's breath caught. Hundreds of dragons lined the ancient volcanic crater, their scales shining in the sun. The 5 elders sat on the highest points, massive and ancient. Pearl's birth mother was there, watching without expression. The head elder, his scales scarred from countless battles, spoke first. The abandoned hatchling returns. This is unusual. Abandoned young do not survive. She had help, Bram said respectfully. The human Ruth Whitmore found Pearl dying and raised her. Murmurs ran through the gathered dragons. Many sounded angry. Humans interfering with dragon customs, one voice growled. The hatchling was abandoned outside dragon territory. Ruth spoke up, her voice surprisingly steady. Dragon law does not cover abandoned young in unclaimed land. I broke no law. The head elder's eyes fixed on Ruth. She felt the weight of that ancient gaze, but did not look away. Finally, he made a rumbling sound that might have been amusement. You are correct. Technically. Very well. The hatchling will face the traditional tests. If she passes, she lives. If she fails, she dies. These are our laws. I understand, Ruth said, though her heart hammered in her chest. The first test was combat. Pearl's brother stepped forward, now massive with dark red scales and powerful muscles. He looked at Pearl with contempt. The weak one should have stayed dead, he said. The fight began with a roar. Pearl's brother charged immediately, using his size advantage. Pearl dodged, moving quickly to the side. She tried to avoid fighting, but her brother gave no mercy. He caught Pearl with his tail, sending her tumbling. Blood marked her silver scales. Ruth wanted to stop this, to run into the arena and protect her daughter. But she forced herself to stay still. Pearl had to face this alone. Pearl got up slowly. She looked at her brother, then did something unexpected. Instead of attacking, she analyzed. She watched how he moved, where his weight shifted the pattern of his strikes. When he charged again, Pearl was ready. She used his momentum against him, stepping aside at the last second and tripping him with her tail. He crashed into the ground. Pearl did not press her advantage. She stepped back, waiting. Her brother rose, angrier now. He attacked again and again. Each time, Pearl avoided, deflected, or redirected. She was not trying to hurt him. She was trying to tire him out. After 15 minutes, her brother was exhausted from his own aggression. Pearl remained calm, barely winded, but the test required a winner. Pearl's brother gathered himself for one more charge. This time, Pearl met him head-on. She was smaller and lighter, but she had been studying his movements. She went low, using her size advantage for once, and swept his front legs out from under him. He fell hard. Pearl pinned him with surprising speed, her jaws at his throat. "Yield," she said softly. It was the first time many dragons had heard her speak. Her brother, shocked, yielded. Pearl released him immediately and stepped back. The gathered dragons were silent. "She fights without honor," one dragon called. "She uses tricks instead of strength. She fights with intelligence," the head elder corrected. "The battle is won. That is all that matters." Test 2. The second test was fire breathing. Young dragons stepped forward one by one, melting metal targets with impressive flames. When Pearl's turn came, Ruth held her breath. Pearl tried. She gathered her breath and released. A thin stream of flame emerged, weaker than all the others. The target barely warmed. Dragons laughed. Pearl hung her head, shame in her posture. She had failed. Ruth's heart broke for her. "Pathetic," one dragon called. "She cannot even manage a proper flame." "Wait," the head elder said. He was staring at Pearl with an odd expression. "Approach the target again." Pearl obeyed, confused. The elder watched carefully. "Now, make your flame as hot as you can, but as small as possible. Focus it." Pearl tried. Her flame became thinner, more concentrated. It was not the massive fire of other dragons, but it burned white hot. The elder brought out a new target, this one with a complex lock mechanism. "Melt only the lock. Do not damage the rest." Pearl's eyes widened in understanding. She approached carefully and released her focused flame. The lock melted precisely, the surrounding metal untouched. It required incredible control, something the other dragons with their powerful flames could not manage easily. "Different is not weak," the elder said, looking at Ruth. "Sometimes different is specialized. Pearl's flame has uses others do not." She passes test 2. Ruth nearly collapsed with relief. 2 tests done. 1 remained, and it was the test Ruth feared most. The third test was dominance. A dragon must command respect from lesser creatures, the elder explained. We will release dangerous predators. The young dragon must force them into submission. A gate opened and 6 cave stalkers emerged. Vicious predators, all teeth and claws. Other young dragons had faced 2 or 3. 6 was meant to ensure Pearl failed. Pearl's brother went first. He roared, shaking the ground. The creatures cowered immediately. They lay flat, showing submission. The test took less than a minute. 2 more young dragons succeeded the same way. Then Pearl's turn came. She walked into the arena slowly. The cave stalkers, sensing weakness, did not cower. They circled, growling. Roar at them, one dragon called mockingly. Pearl looked at the creatures, then at Ruth. Ruth gestured encouragement. Pearl did something no dragon had ever done. She sat down. The cave stalkers paused, confused. Pearl made a soft sound, not a roar, but a gentle rumble. She lowered her head, less threatening. What is she doing? A dragon asked. This is madness. The cave stalkers moved closer, still cautious but curious. Pearl remained still, radiating calm instead of dominance. One creature approached and sniffed her. Pearl did not react. Slowly, the creature sat down next to her. Then another, and another. Within minutes, all 6 cave stalkers were resting peacefully around Pearl. The gathered dragons fell silent. This was not submission through fear. This was something else entirely, something they did not have words for. She failed, one elder said firmly. They did not submit. They simply chose to rest. She commanded their peace, the head elder countered. Is that not a form of control? She made dangerous creatures safe without violence, without fear, without force. That is not our way, another elder argued. Dragons rule through strength. Ruth stepped forward into the arena. Is a dragon only valuable in war? Pearl found a lost child when no one else could. She warns the settlement of danger. She solves problems others cannot. She brings peace instead of fear. Are these not strengths? The human speaks out of turn, an elder growled. Let her speak, the head elder said. Ruth addressed all the dragons. You abandoned Pearl because she was different. You called her weak, but you were wrong. Pearl is not a warrior dragon. She's something new, a dragon who can bridge gaps, who brings different strengths. You can kill her for being different or recognize that difference has value. Silence. Then Bram stepped forward. I have watched Pearl. The human speaks truth. Pearl has abilities we lack. She understands other species. When Crothian raiders came, Pearl's intelligence saved lives without escalating conflict. The head elder looked at Pearl, still sitting calmly among the cave stalkers. You speak, young one. Defend yourself. Pearl stood slowly. The cave stalkers moved with her, not threatening, but protective. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. I cannot be what you wanted me to be. I'm not a warrior, but I am a dragon. I have dragon honor and dragon courage. I choose to use them differently. If that makes me unworthy of life in your eyes, then I accept that judgment. But I will not apologize for being myself. Ruth felt tears on her face. She had raised Pearl well. Pearl's mother moved for the first time. She approached her daughter, the silver hatchling she had abandoned months ago. I left you to die because I thought you were weak. I was wrong. You are perhaps the strongest of all my children because you chose a harder path. You chose to be yourself when everyone said you should be something else. Will you forgive me? The mother asked quietly. Pearl touched her snout to her mother's. You followed your traditions. Ruth taught me that we grow by learning when traditions need to change. The head elder watched this exchange. Finally, he spoke. I have lived 600 years. I have seen countless dragons tested. Never have I seen one like this. Pearl has failed our traditional tests by traditional standards, but she has shown us something we needed to see. Strength comes in many forms. A dragon who can bring peace, solve problems, and bridge differences has value we did not recognize before. He paused, letting his words settle. Pearl will not be executed. Instead, she will be given a new designation. She will be our first bridge guardian. Her role will be to protect those who cannot protect themselves and to serve as a liaison between species. Other young dragons who do not fit traditional molds will be given this option. They need not die for being different. The gathered dragons erupted in argument. Some supported this decision. Others called it weakness, a betrayal of dragon culture. The head elder let them argue, then raised his voice. This is my decision. Challenge me if you dare. Know that I won't challenge. The head elder's authority was absolute. Ruth ran to Pearl, embracing her dragon daughter. You did it. You showed them. We did it, Pearl corrected. You taught me that being different was okay. You gave me the strength to be myself. Bram approached, dipping his head respectfully. I would like to train as a bridge guardian as well, if Pearl will have me as a partner. Pearl looked at the blue dragon who had given them a chance. I would be honored. As the sun set over the council grounds, Ruth stood with Pearl and watched the world change. Not quickly, not easily, but change nonetheless. Some dragons would never accept this new way. But others, especially the younger ones, approached Pearl with curiosity instead of contempt. At a revolution, Ruth thought, sometimes starts with one grandmother who refused to let a baby die in the cold. 6 months after the trial, the human settlement looked different. Dragon hatchlings played alongside human children. Young dragons who struggled with traditional training visited Ruth. The bridge between species grew stronger. Pearl had grown into her role as bridge guardian. She was fully grown, her opalescent scales gleaming. She spent her days mediating disputes, protecting trade routes, and teaching other dragons about different forms of strength. Bram worked alongside her. Together, they had prevented 3 conflicts. Other young dragons joined the program, each bringing unique abilities. The dragon who could not breathe fire became an expert metalworker. The dragon too small for combat became a master scout. Dragon culture was changing slowly. Not all dragons accepted it. Some elders grumbled about traditions. But the bridge guardians were effective and necessary. Ruth sat in her garden, watching Pearl teach 3 young dragons how to communicate with human children. The dragons were awkward, but trying. You are good with them, and said, sitting down next to her mother. The dragons, I mean. You treat them like children. They are children, Ruth said simply. Different children need different approaches. Some need discipline, some need encouragement, some need space. Dragons are not so different from humans in that way. And smiled. You never did retire, did you? You just found a different job. Retirement is boring. This is interesting. Ruth watched Pearl gently correct a young dragon's pronunciation. Besides, someone had to show these stubborn lizards that their way was not the only way. Only you would call a dragon a stubborn lizard to their face. They need to hear it sometimes. Pearl finished her lesson and approached Ruth, lowering her head for the gentle scratch behind her ear ridges that she loved. Ruth obliged, and Pearl rumbled contentedly. The young ones are learning well, Pearl said, though Barry keeps trying to impress the human children by showing off. Barry needs to learn that showing off is not the same as showing strength, Ruth replied. I will talk to him. You have talked to him 5 times this week. Then I will talk to him a 6th time. Eventually, it will sink in. David approached with a tablet in hand. Ruth, we received a message from the Galactic Council. They want to send observers to study the Bridge Guardian program. Apparently, word has spread about what you are doing here. Ruth raised an eyebrow. What we are doing? Pearl did most of the work. Pearl credits you, David countered. And frankly, so do I. You started something important here. Other species are interested in creating similar programs. Dragons teaching cooperation instead of just combat. It could change the galaxy. Or it could just help a few dragons who did not fit the mold, Ruth said. Either way, it is worth doing. Over the following weeks, observers arrived from various species. They watched Pearl work. They interviewed Ruth. They studied the cultural shift. Some were skeptical. Others were inspired. One alien scholar approached Ruth. Your approach is revolutionary. How did you know it would work? I did not know, Ruth admitted. I just knew Pearl deserved a chance to be herself. Pearl's birth mother visited regularly now. She had become one of the Bridge Guardian program's strongest advocates, arguing with traditional elders and defending the young dragons who chose this path. She approached Ruth one afternoon with unusual nervousness. I wanted to thank you, the mother said. You gave my daughter the life I could not. You saw value where I saw weakness. You were following your traditions, Ruth said. We all do the best we can with what we know. But you did better. You knew something we did not. The mother paused. Would you teach me? I want to understand how to raise dragons who are different, like Pearl. So no other mother makes the mistake I made. Ruth felt tears prick her eyes. This proud dragon warrior, asking for help, admitting she was wrong. I would be honored, Ruth said. As the sun set, Ruth sat in her usual spot with Pearl beside her. The dragon's head rested in Ruth's lap, too heavy for comfort, but Ruth would never complain. Ant's grandchildren played nearby, climbing over a patient young dragon who rumbled with amusement. Are you happy? Ruth asked Pearl softly. Yes, Pearl replied. I'm exactly who I am supposed to be. Are you happy? Ruth thought about her life. She had lost her husband, left Earth, come to a strange world, found a dying dragon baby, and changed the course of her life. Yes, she said finally. I am happy. You know what? What? Because I raised 6 human children, and they all turned out well. But you, Pearl, you change a culture. You prove that being different is not the same as being wrong. That is a legacy worth having. Pearl lifted her head and looked at Ruth with those intelligent, pale blue eyes. I could not have done it without you, and I could not have done it without you being brave enough to be yourself. They sat together as stars appeared in the sky. Around them, the settlement buzzed with life. Dragons and humans working together, learning from each other, building something new. It had started with one grandmother who refused to let a baby die in the cold. Sometimes the biggest changes begin with the smallest acts of kindness. Sometimes strength means seeing value where others see weakness. And sometimes, family is not about who gave birth to you, but who loved you enough to help you become yourself. Pearl hummed softly, a sound Ruth had taught her from an old Earth lullaby. Ruth hummed along, and in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be.